Good evening. I'm just a little bit late this evening, uh, this afternoon, uh, and apologize for being a few minutes late. So tonight we're going to do week two of HRM 316 employee selection and staffing. As you know, if you looked at the at Campus Web, this is actually is our first written assignment, as well as, of course, having a couple of forum discussion assignments. By the way, I will answer your forum discussion assignments tomorrow for the Abercrombie and Fitch case. And so what's affirmative action? I appreciate that you posted. I know that most of you have, and I will get to those tomorrow and post a grade for you to see in the grade book. So the assignment is to provide an overview definition. Perhaps working definition is a better term to use than overview, but we're not looking for or I'm not looking for a definition in great detail. But I am looking for a definition of recruitment, selection, staffing, and job analysis. Now we're going to go over selection, recruitment, and job analysis in greater detail later in the course. So a lot of what we're going to give tonight, it will be whetting your appetite for more talk, more substance later on in the course. After completing the definition, as is posted on Campus Web, show how each of these pieces it's an integral part of the hiring process, and then praise it's important to human resource management. Now, we may not think of job analysis as being important to the recruiting process, but it is. We'll go through that to some extent. And then, as I caution you, to point out to you, when you're giving definitions, make sure the definitions are in your own words, not those of the text. Now, you could, if you prefer, if you like, or if you want, or you wish, whatever the right term is that you'd like to use here, is use the text definition and then show what your definition is, or what your take on that definition is, what it means to you. And that's perfectly okay. Of course, if you take the definition out of the text, please do the appropriate citation. But I prefer, if possible, and you should prefer, because it helps you and it helps your learning process, and it helps you improve in understanding and your student stature, etc., to use your own words. That's known as paraphrasing. And paraphrasing does two things. Number one, it shows that you can place the concept that you have read in your own words. And the second thing is that in doing so, you do not change the meaning of the definition. So by all means, always try to paraphrase. I realize that sometimes it's very, very important to use the words of a particular author or the text or some other reference that you've done. You need to use that for specific reasons, and that's all well and good. But direct quotation should be at a minimum, and we want to be able to have some gauge. You should be able to have some gauge of your understanding of something and putting it in your own words. And then it shows academic progress, and it shows that you do have a good understanding of academics, what's needed, what's required, and how to move forth. So I'd like to begin by saying, prior to beginning the recruiting process to fill vacancies, an organization should engage in two processes. Now, I want to stop back here just for a second and tell you that most of what I am talking about tonight, and most of what the text talks about when it talks about filling vacancies, it is pretty much talking about filling entry-level vacancies. That does not mean to say that you would not do some of the same techniques, not use some of the same techniques not have some of the same policies and procedures to fill vacancies if you were filling a vacancy for a higher level position. Now, certainly you probably would use the same thing if you were hiring someone in middle management or a supervisor, but you wouldn't use the same procedures necessarily for someone in senior management or at the senior executive level. Those are different. Normally companies use headhunting firms and things of that nature to find, especially at the executive level. But by and large, you do have to follow some procedures. Obviously, you have to follow the law. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in a lot of problems, or like the jackpot, like I like to say, because somebody's going to come back and say, well, you didn't follow the law. You pick somebody without going through the process. You excluded minorities, women, etc. So whatever the law happens to be, it needs to be followed. The laws are not there just because they need to be there. They're there for a particular reason. And we're going to talk more about the law next week when we get into really discussing Chapter 3 and spending some time on the Willie Griggs case back in the 1970s and some other things that impacted how we do things. So the first thing that has to be done by any organization, or should be done by any organization, especially a medium-sized organization, I'll define that for you in a second, and a large organization is preparing a job analysis or job analyses if you have more than one vacancy. And I said I'd define medium and large. Medium usually is considered to be 500 or more, and large would be at least over 1,000. Some people might say 1,500 or 2,000. Some people say the medium-sized companies 500 to 2,000, but certainly those size companies should have a human resource department that is into some of this planning. If you're a mom and pop business, or you're another type of small business with maybe a partnership, or even a I was going to say 501c3, but I don't want to say that. That's a nonprofit organization. It would be an S corporation or something, or an LLC, where you would have more people involved. They may not have what's known as a human resource management organization, or department, but there are off-the-shelf software programs that you can buy that help you as Mr. or Miss Small Company do this human resource planning and get some kind of an idea. And it's something you really need to do because there has to be a planning process. And we call it human resource planning. For the most part, again, we see these in larger companies, but small companies need to do this. There has to be some kind of an idea of what you need to do and how to follow forth. The text will treat job analysis in Chapter 5, and we'll do that separately, and human resource planning in Chapter 6, which we'll talk about a little bit more here this evening. I'm not going to quibble with the text's authors, but as far as I'm concerned, human resource planning should preclude or precede job analysis. And I say that because you have to know what you need, and the job analysis is something that either is or should be a continual process. Too often, companies will do a job analysis. By the way, I'll probably repeat this later, so just bear with me. We'll do a job analysis and then not update it at all for a period of time, and then go back sometime later, I'm talking a couple of years here, and find out that it's changed. So human resource planning, you should always have some kind of an idea of the projected vacancies due to retirement, due to normal turnover, which you hope is relatively low, by the way, and promotions, etc. So you would have some kind of an idea of what you need on a continual basis. I ask that you look at the sentence at the bottom of page 116. Human resource planning is an integral piece of an organization's strategy, and without it, companies will not be successful. That's a rather strong statement. So what it's telling you, if you're not doing planning, especially for your employees, your employed, what you need, you're not going to be successful. John Ivancovich, in his Human Resource Management text, 9th edition, 2004, says human resource planning is both a process and a set of plans. The planning piece determines the numbers and types of employees a firm will need. Furthermore, the plan attempts to eliminate any disparity between the labor supply and the ensuing demand. Now, what does that mean? That means that an organization ought to look at its operating environment. And what I mean by operating environment is where it does business. And so then when it does that, it should do an environmental scan. That's my term. You could use a different term if you wish, to find out if the local environment, the operating environment, has the type of population from which you can draw the employees that you need. And then if that local population doesn't have that, then you have to expand the area from which you do normal recruiting. Now, again, when I'm talking here, I'm excluding senior managers and executive folks for the most part, because those tend to be done on a wider basis, et cetera. But so in other words, if your normal recruiting area is 25 miles, a 25-mile radius of your area of operations, and that 25 miles does not have the skills and education, knowledge, experience that you need, then you're going to have to expand it maybe another 25 miles or perhaps another 50 miles. And I'm talking about radius here. I'm not talking about geographical miles one way. I'm talking about a circumference. So this is something companies have to pay attention to. That's the plan. The process is what you do, how you go through finding people, et cetera. Your text, Carruth, and Payne, defines human resource planning a little bit differently than Ivancovich does. The authors state it may be thought of as one, a forecast of an organization's labor needs that scans the internal and external environments. Internal shows both an organization's requirements, or it should, and the assets currently available. The forecast then compares the two to determine if any gaps exist and determine how these should be addressed if and as necessary. Now, let's look at this as a slide here coming from Stewart and Brown's Human Resource Management, their second edition. Don't remember the exact publication date. I'll get it for you. 2011, I believe it is. So notice here what it says about employees are hired to do a job, and they're hired to do a job, and we know what the job is because we've done a job analysis, which you see is in the second bullet. So this is part of, at least as far as I'm concerned, human resource planning, but the planning comes first and the job analysis comes second. And then this is the job analysis again, which is depicted very strongly in chapter 5, and we'll talk about that at a great extent. But this just gives you some kind of an idea here of what's required for a job analysis. And again, we're going to spend more time on that some in the future, but not at the present moment. So let's go back here and see the second piece is setting policies and procedures in place to acquire the needed human resources. We can consider this as an action plan, although we're talking here policies and procedures, but it does, once we've done this, we've set these policies and procedures together, then we develop the action plan. That is, what do we need? Where can we find the resources? Now here we're talking about human resources, also known as employees. And what do we need to do to attract these potential employees to apply for job vacancies? Now, in what I'm speaking of here, I'm not necessarily speaking of internal or external employees, but I'm talking about what it is we have to do to get people to apply for vacancies. So internal, obviously, you have job postings and things of that nature. So we covered the third piece pointed out by the author. So any additional comments would be superfluous. Finally, the authors, Caruth, Cruz, and Payne, so there's some commonality in these human resource planning definitions. First, human resource planning is not a one-time action. And I think that's very important to understand. It's a continual action. Now, it's one time when you begin the plan, but the plan should be an evolving plan, should be continual, because your human resource needs are going to change over time. They're not going to be static. You might find you're in a climate of growth, and obviously then the plan should be set in such a way that it can accommodate that growth. You might find that you're in a climate of retraction, and so it has to look at those kinds of things. Second, primary purpose of human resource planning is to help assure the organization achieves its mission, goals, and objectives. So what that simply means is, or it should mean, is the plan that is developed either incorporates the mission, goals, and objectives, or it supports the mission, goals, and objectives. Now, probably it does a little bit of both. The plan should have something in there that incorporates them, but not necessarily spelling them out, although it could, maybe not the mission, but certainly the goals and objectives, because to support the mission, you have to have certain type of employees, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be in there. It's important to remember that organizations cannot be successful without the right employees in the right jobs. Now, I'm going to digress on that a little bit later, or almost contradict that a little bit later when we talk about organization fit as opposed to employee job fit, but we can explain that. Finally, human resource planning cannot be undertaken on a whim. It must be thorough, analytical, and in sync with the strategic initiatives of the organization that we've mentioned before, mission, goals, and objectives. And of course, strategy plays into that, and strategy may change. So that means or should mean that the human resource planning should be dynamic, in that, while we said before it's continual, not only is it continual, but it's changing to meet the needs of the organization, while at the same time adapting to the operating environment or environments, as the case may be. Figure 6.1 on page 119 depicts the human resource planning process with 3 distinct phases. Note that it begins as a part of the strategic business planning. Now, I want to take a minute here to tell you, or take a second here to tell you, that for a long period of time, certainly in my working days, before this and hopefully after this, human resource management was thought of as the office that was down the hall and around the corner. And it's where you went to fill out your paperwork for insurance, uh, telling the folks to add a newborn to your dependents and so on and things of that nature. And a lot of people felt it was not, it just wasn't part of the organization because it was hard to get to. If you had to spend some time in there, you either had to devote your entire break time to that, or you'd have to devote your lunchtime to it. It wasn't convenient. Well, organizations have tried, and their human resource departments have tried to change that image in the last few years, and that human resource management is now thought of as an integral part of a company's strategic management. And so they're not just the guys and the gals down the hall around the corner. They actually have a place at the corporate table, or where they sit and talk about things that are important. Because, as we said before, an organization simply can't be successful without having the right type of employee. Notice there in that figure that phase one is concerned with numbers. And numbers, as you can see or understand, or you probably know yourself from having experienced it, are a moving target that's affected by production, attrition, even the status quo. And that's internal. We've not talked about external. People in the operating environment that don't work for you that might want to work for you someday. Phase two is concerned with availability, both internal and external, which I kind of alluded to in that last statement. And then phase three is the action phase. In this phase, the human resource planners must ensure the organization has the right number of employees in the right jobs and that they are adequately skilled and educated. If they're not, then the human resource management department is probably going to have to develop a training program. Now, I mentioned training and education. In many cases, large companies, their human resource department will contract with somebody, a local school. I'm talking about School of Higher Education here, post-secondary, to come in and conduct on-site education. Some companies, if they're large enough, will help people earn a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. They may possibly do for a doctoral degree as well. And sometimes they bring, a institution of higher learning in, and classes are conducted on site. After hours, of course, but on site. Now, training programs teaching employees needed skills or retraining them on for new skills usually is done on company time, work time. And so human resource management people often develop those or ensure that that training is developed somehow if it's done out of house. The next important piece here to speak about is to have in place, before any recruiting activity takes place, a valid job analysis, which we've talked about before. The author states it's simply the collecting, analyzing, interpreting the specifics of a job. Now, when we get to chapter 5 and talk about job analysis, we're going to go a little bit deeper than we are here. Definition also mentions reporting, because you have to tell somebody about this. Now, in telling somebody about it, it could simply be, this is what we, to the supervisor or manager, this is what we found. But the reporting part also means that you put this information someplace where it can be easily retrieved. And of course, the next part of that means that it's published in some respects. Now, published, of course, today is a lot different than it was many years ago when you'd actually have a piece of paper. This could be simply posted on somewhere on the company's internal bulletin board or its intranet, but it needs to be published, as well as and of course then it needs to be maintained by the Human Resource Management Department and also by the department in which an employee or prospective employee works or will work. Furthermore, as the text points out, it is the most fundamental and important element of human resource functions because all other functions and documents depend upon the accuracy of the job analysis. It is especially important to have a valid job analysis to assure compliance with federal regulations. Now, let's look at the requirement forecast a little bit more. We'll talk about that and see if we can't add to what we've talked about here. I know I'm coming something away from the job analysis, and I'm going to get back to that, but we really need to talk about the forecast. Remember that the requirements forecast is an estimate of both the quantity and type needed to fill projected vacancies. It's important to remember that quantity is only part of the picture. Forecasting, of course, is not an exact science, and it's usually accomplished in one of two ways. It's subjective, given and input is usually gathered from first-line supervisors or managers. Quantitative, which is based on a mathematical formula. That usually can be done by buying software off the shelf and feeding the appropriate numbers into it, and so you come up with that. Figure 6.2 depicts a human resources forecasting form. That's notional, and what I mean by notional is it's something that you can use and say, okay, well, this is what it is. It doesn't mean that that's something that we use by every company. Again, you can buy software off the shelf. Availability forecast comes in two varieties, internal and external. In the internal part, the Human Resource Management Department should have an inventory of the skills of the current labor force. Current labor force meaning the force that works for you. And they're going to have such items listed there as education, experience. That experience could be both job experience and experience in the field. Field being general, job being specific, certifications or licenses held, and then performance appraisals. A separate inventory for managers is also maintained, and it would include or contain much of the same information previously mentioned, plus the field the person is in, such as accounting, engineering, finance, sales, technology, etc. Job and location preferences, that the person's willing to move or not. That used to be something that was you would find on many job applications years ago. Are you willing to relocate? I don't know that you find that today, and I'm not so sure whether or not that is an illegal question. It may be, and I'm going to check that, get that information to you. Promotion potential. I'd like to take just a second here and try to remind you, or at least to get you to think of it this way. People should not be promoted based upon their current job performance. They should be promoted based on demonstrated potential to handle the next level of supervision or the next level of their job or whatever that right term happens to be. Too often we promote people based upon the job that they have done, as opposed to looking at, does this person have the potential to handle the next higher position. I can tell you, I remember an incident when I was in the Army, and we needed to put somebody into a position to be our motor pool and maintenance sergeant. And the person that should have been selected, who was next in line based upon his job performance, was not the right person to put in the job. And so I felt that, now I wasn't talking about promoting anybody here because I didn't have that authority to do that, but I was talking about putting somebody in the position to handle that until that person was either promoted or we had somebody who was promoted into the position. But I had the opportunity to put somebody in there, and so I talked to the person who would have been first eligible due to the fact he'd been there longest and was a good performer. And one of his friends, they were close friends, was also in that same department. I was hoping that he would decline the position, and but I felt that I had to offer it to him first. And in our conversation, he told me that he thought that his friend would be a better candidate to run the motor pool. And I thanked him for his candor and said, that's what I thought too, but I wanted to make sure that I offered you the position first. I got lucky, but had I done something different, I think I would have caused a lot of friction within that department. But that's what we should do, and that doesn't mean that I was very smart in this. I just happened to understand that the other fellow had better leadership skills, and that's what I needed. I didn't need technical skills because the guy that I was talking to first wasn't going to leave there. He was going to be there for a while longer, and he had the technical skills. The other guy that I wanted to put in there not only had the technical skills, he had the leadership skills, and that's what I was looking for. And then, of course, they're also looking for in-house training and development programs that these people had either attended or completed or did both. On external, we would look for many of the same things that we find in internal candidates, but other important criteria would be demographic changes. Education level, has it gone up or down? That's talking about our surrounding area. The economy, what's the economy like? We know that when the economy is very good, it's a seller's market. And what I mean by that is the person who has the skills that are needed will go to work for the highest bidder because we have very low unemployment. And this person is not only marketable, but he's or she is sought after. So that's a seller's market. Technological change. Has our technology changed, or has the technology kept up in the local area? Are the people who we are looking for capable, skilled in the areas that we need them to be skilled in? If they're not, we probably need to go someplace else. Societal attitudes toward our particular industry, our particular institution. If people are kind of against us, we probably aren't going to find anybody in the local area. Now, a lot of the information that I have talked about can be gathered from the U.S. Department of Labor. And then requirements and availability comparison may reveal demand is equal to supply. So that means however many jobs you're posting, there's an equal number of people looking for them. Demand is less than supply. And then, of course, demand is greater than supply. If demand and supply are equal, then no special recruiting efforts are needed. Demand is less than supply, the organization can employ the following tactics. Restricted hiring, replacing only the most critical positions. Reduced hours, that's another way of cutting costs. Job sharing, this is not a long-term answer, due to the employee's reduced earning power. Early retirement often appeals to people in higher positions, and of course, last, which we don't like to talk about, but is a possibility of layoffs. If the demand is greater than supply, then organizations can use the following: enlarge the recruiting area, and then go after people more aggressively by different means of advertisement. Change compensation incentives. Increase training and develop programs, or perhaps a better way of saying it is not so much as increasing them, but making sure that you're offering either more or the right or a combination of both. And then consider changing selection standards. Remember, if we're going to lower standards, that comes with its own set of problems. It may not be something that we want to do or is very palatable. As I mentioned, we are going to treat job description more fully later in the course, especially when we talk about Chapter 5. If I said job description, I meant job analysis. But there are several elements we need to talk about within job analysis. That's the job description. That's the principal product that is developed from the job analysis, written summary of the job. Job specification is another that comes from the job analysis that outlines the minimum qualifications, skills, education, experience, etc. Job tasks, the position, and the job analysis may also include the job, or that is a specific group of jobs with similar duties and responsibilities. The job family, which is a group of 2 or more jobs that have similar duties and responsibilities. If an organization does not have written job analyses, it cannot complete its recruiting, selection, and staffing functions. Well, that probably is a little bit of a misnomer statement. I said it can't complete them. And that probably ought to be changed to it can't complete them accurately. It can be completed, obviously. I mean, you can just go out and say, hey, you, hey, you, hey, you, and hey, you, come in. We're going to hire you for work, assuming you have people standing outside the gate or the front door. But that's not very scientific, and it's certainly not very objective. So that's what I'm talking about accurately. Yeah, you can fill them, but you're not going to fill them the way you want to fill them, and you're not going to get most likely the type, quality of employee that you're looking for. You may get quantity, but you're not going to get the quality that you need. It's appropriate to view the job analysis as a hub, and then recruiting, selection, and staffing as spokes, because the job analysis drives and helps drive and complete the other functions. Now, let's take some time here, if you will, to examine the terms a little more fully. Recruiting is the process of finding a sufficient quantity. Now, remember, we're recruiting. We're trying to find people. So we need to have a quantity here. Now, remember, we're not talking about senior level people here or executives. We're talking about mostly rank and file employees. Now, don't think when I say rank and file, I'm referring to unions. I'm not. Rank and file just means the normal person that works there, he or she doesn't hold a higher level position. Not to say that person is not important. He or she is. We can't forget that. But their position is really what, for our purposes, considered entry level. Sufficient quantity of individuals with the qualifications needed to fill an employment vacancy, or an employee vacancy is probably a better way to state that. Now, I just used this before, and I'll say it again. Many years ago, And I'm talking about probably back in the late 1800s up to the beginning of the 20th century, maybe even a little bit past. A supervisor might walk outside the company gates or company front door and find a group of men, usually men, standing around, and he needed some employees, and he would, and again, the supervisor most likely was a man, would point to these folks and say, okay, you, and you come into work, and the rest of you people go home. And that's what we might call initial screening, but more likely, the job seekers I'm talking about in this particular scenario were picked for their physical attributes, and there was no qualification that was looked at other than stature. And you know, that's not a very good way to select people to work. But before we got sophisticated at doing these types of things, many people were hired simply in that fashion. Now, we might still select people based upon physical qualifications or what we think are physical qualities, but not very often. In the recruiting process, we must attract and find the right applicants or start over, and that's a very costly process. Recruiting, as the authors state, again, is finding people with the right stuff. I don't think they used the right stuff. That's my take on it. That's the skills, experience, and education in sufficient numbers. And here's the critical part: encouraging them to apply for vacancies. And this is one of the ways we do this. This is a strategic approach, and it helps the employer of choice. It makes the organization the employer of choice. Excuse me, I didn't look at that correctly. And when you as an employer become the employer of choice, your chances of having greater quality employee go up significantly. And these people want to work there, and therefore you're going to get most likely a better quality, and you have a better way of screening here because you have better quality. So you can go from top to bottom fairly easily. Main purpose of recruiting is to have a large enough pool of qualified individuals from which applicants can be selected. Qualified individuals, somebody putting in an application or a resume or both, and then we'll go through some kind of a screening process. Ivancovich says the recruiting effort is the organization's first exposure to prospective employees, and so it's critical that the organization make a good first impression. Now here's a couple of ways to do this. Now, one is called a broad skill scope, and the other is a targeted scope. In the broad, you're going to try to find as many people as possible. And a lot of companies will do that. That's their strategy. We're looking for as many people as possible. On the opposite side of that is the targeted, where you're trying to attract a small number of people with requisite skills. And so when you do a broad skill scope, let me do an analogy here for you. When you do a broad skill scope, you would advertise for people in the local newspaper. You're trying to find as many as you possibly can. And of course, you might post on some kind of a website, monster.com or jobs.com or something else of that nature. And a targeted scope, you wouldn't go to that shotgun approach, it's my term. You would narrow that down. So if you're looking for a specific skill set, you might go to a trade organization publication, or you might go to a specific job website for engineers, or for information management folks, or for accountants, or for something else, as opposed to going out here and shooting at the world. And that's the way you make a better impression in a way when you're doing that scrutiny. And then here's the targeted skill scope, just going a little bit further, and then it just gives you the idea of what you're doing. Let's go back here to the other one. There's the broad skill scope. I'm not going to read that for you. Don't be concerned about bargain labor. That's tied up with the text that I'm using, slides from this text. But broad skill scope just tells you that's what you're doing. And you're not looking bargain labor. Just think of it this way. You're not looking for somebody who has specific skills. And it's possible that you're going to have a fairly large turnover with this type of organization. So we are almost at 5:20, and we spent just about the last 48 minutes here. We just turned 5:20, and we probably have about another 45 minutes or hour to go. So I would like to take a break now and ask you to please come back at 5:25. Thank you. Please come back at 5:25. All right, it's 5:25. We're back, and we're here to conclude the last 45 minutes or so of this evening's lecture. Figure 7.1 in your text presents a model recruiting process. Now, I just want to point out to you that that's a model. That doesn't mean it has to be followed, but the folks that wrote our book are not only, in some cases, college professors, but they're also practitioners in employee selection and staffing, and so they have something that they've used, developed, and they're passing that on to us as a piece of information, as a tool to use. Note there are many alternatives to outside recruiting, among them screening for potential in-house candidates who possess the right qualifications. We could use overtime. We can use temporaries. We could use contractors. Or perhaps we could outsource work to other organizations. And this particular slide gives you some kind of idea of what we're talking about. If we're going to do internal, we know that we have the current employees, and we know their pluses and minuses. If we're going to go outside the organization, then we know we may be looking for people in other organizations. And of course, the other things that I mentioned here, independent contractors and temporary workers, and we could get people from temp agencies. There's it's a term called temp to hire. You may want to do that. You may not want to do that. You give some kind of things. I did a different institution where I taught some years ago, and we talked about this, and one of my students said, yeah, but the problem with that is they always refer to you as temp. Get that temp over here. Have that temp come over here. Now, there are some real problems with this, and I want to point this out, and I don't remember that the text actually talks about this. You have a temporary employee. They cannot be treated as a normal employee. So there are some things that you will require employees to do you cannot require temps to do. And there's legal things there, and so you have to be careful about that. That's the same thing true with contractors. If you have a meeting, for instance, that you want all employees to go to, but it doesn't really pertain to contractors, and you can't require a contractor to go there. And you can't treat a contractor or a temporary employee, as a matter of fact, but mostly a contractor. You can't treat them as anything other than an employee, anything other than the contractor. If you treat them as an employee, then you have to provide them whatever you provide your regular employees. And large companies have gotten in trouble. Microsoft is one, have gotten in trouble for doing that. So you must be careful about doing that. Each and every one of these has practices, internal, external, has pluses and minuses. If we're going to hire from within, the plus is we know what we have. We should have a record on this person, how well he or she performs, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, once we move that person to another position, assuming there's a position open, then we have to fill that position that he or she vacated, that backfilling. And of course, if we select this person to move up to the next position, that may create some animosity with the folks that he or she works with. How come that person was singled out? Why weren't we given a chance? All those things come into play. Overtime can be good for short periods of time. Most people do like overtime to some extent, but they don't like it long term. And I'll just give you an example. I'll use myself. I started, well, my wife and I had not been married for a very long period of time. and I was working for a small, pardon me, a small company, and overtime became essential with what I was doing. And I remember 1 2 week period, I worked almost 20 hours overtime. So that's half of a normal 40-hour work week. And I liked the money, but I sure didn't like being away from home. And so that's what I say here is just that overtime is a short-term fix. And the other thing we need to think about is there is ample data that say that a person's productivity, I don't care whether we're talking about manufacturing or the desk job or doing information management or something else, starts reducing after 8 hours on the job. That's why we work an 8-hour work week, an 8-hour work day, because people found that production falls off after 8 hours on the job. Now, that's not to say that people can't work 9 hours or 10 hours and you don't get that. And of course, we have compressed work weeks and things of that nature where you now have 10-hour days or 12-hour days and then a commensurate amount of time off. It doesn't mean to say that that can't happen, but over a long period of time, it starts wearing on people, not only physically, but mentally. And what we find is that mental capacity starts going a lot quicker than physical capacity. So if the mental goes, then that's going to cause the physical to go, or it's going to cause the physical to do something the physical normally wouldn't do if it was rested well enough. So there's a real trade-off with that. So you have to be careful about that. Temporaries and contractors, we kind of talked about that before. One of the good things is if you have temporaries and contractors, you don't have to, pardon me, you don't have to pay benefits for them. If you have a temporary, the temp agency pays any kind of benefits that they're coming to. A contractor is somebody that works for hire. He or she's like in the Old West, a hired gun, and they work. They don't get any benefits. That's not in their makeup. That's not required. And so you're not paying anything out. So you're saving some money there. But on the other hand, these people are not necessarily, especially a contractor, pardon me, not necessarily tied to the company. And so contractor probably has it in his or her contract. They can leave whenever they want. Of course, the company also has that as well, that they can terminate the contract whenever they want. So we have to be careful about those things. And then outsourcing also has benefits, and there's some pluses and minuses to it. But then one of the problems is maybe the company no longer can exert the kind of influence over the outsourced jobs that he or she once did. Now, of course, if you have a good contract, it will work. I always like to point, we tend to think in the United States, and often rightfully so, that outsourcing is bad for the American economy. It's also bad specifically for the worker because the jobs are shipped overseas and the worker is not going to see those again. Often those jobs that are shipped overseas don't pay the wages that the American worker is used to being paid. And so they're menial jobs. Well, I don't want to say that. They're routine, mundane jobs in some cases. Maybe they are menial jobs in other cases. But if they were in the United States, because of our standard of living, they would be paid much more than they're being paid overseas. And of course, companies do that because they can reduce overhead and reduce salary and things of that nature. Now, obviously, there's downsides to that. Nike ran into that a few years ago when people found out that their products were being made with child labor. And there was a big backlash to that. And Nike did overcome that. They did some things to change that around. One of the reasons that Nike outsourced is because it found out that it was good. It was good at sales. It was good at promotion. It was good at product development, but it wasn't good at manufacturing. And so he said, okay, we got to outsource this manufacturing. The fact that it went outside the United States, of course, caused a lot of angst, but that's a different story. Now, before I leave this outsourcing, I do want to bring up that there are some things that do work. A few years, Procter & Gamble, a large Fortune 500 company located headquartered right here in Cincinnati, decided that it did not have the right skill set to operate its own information technology department. It felt that it was not a core competency, and so it outsourced that information management function that it had, and outsourced it to Hewlett-Packard, another American company. I'm not sure Hewlett-Packard's still on the Fortune 500 list, but if it's not, it's probably close. And this was a win-win for everybody. Procter & Gamble was able to rid itself, just listen to that term, don't jump too far, to rid itself of a non-core competency, put it with an organization, Hewlett-Packard, for which information management was a core competency. And not only did Procter & Gamble win, and Hewlett-Packard won by getting this large contract, all of the employees who worked for Procter & Gamble went to work for Hewlett-Packard if they wanted to. They didn't have to, but if they wanted to, they could go to Hewlett-Packard. And they stayed in place. They didn't move. So their physical location was the same place. I don't know what they worked out in pension and things of that kind of that nature. That's different. But employees didn't lose their job. They were still doing the same thing. They were still, in essence, working for Procter & Gamble, and they were working on Procter & Gamble's premises. So that turned out to be a win-win situation. I think they signed a 10-year contract. I don't know where that is today, but it seems to have worked very well. Most entry-level jobs do require outside recruiting. By the way, let's move down here and look at a couple of these things. How we get employees, job postings, etc., for internal. Yeah, let's come down here to. We do job postings. We know what that is. Company website or company intranet. Then we would also possibly do employee referrals. And this is a great tool, but remember what the problems that Allen Bradley ran into. Its employee referral was from a almost entire white workforce, and of course most of the people that were referred were white, and that got them into problems because their workforce was not reflective of their area of operations. Now, this is a quick, easy method to do it. Referrals tend to be better people because the employer referring them would not do so if he or she thought they couldn't do the job. And then, see, the final bullet here is that once the employee has referred someone and that person has come to work, the employee's commitment to the company increases because he or she now believes they have a more vested interest because the employer has taken their word, hired somebody, and so there's a lot of satisfied people there, the new employee and of course the old employee. And of course the other thing to do is you want to recognize those people because the people who did the referral in some fashion. Some companies have a bonus, some companies do other type things, but you do want to recognize them because that's something you want to continue and you want to perpetuate. Most entry-level jobs we're going to do outside recruiting. We won't for the most part, and I'm going to say 99.9%. Hire a current employee for an entry-level job. It doesn't make a lot of sense, so we're not going to do that. Depending upon the job, organizations find these depending upon the job, organizations are going to find these people in various and sundry places. Schools, both secondary and post-secondary, competitors, other businesses, solicited and unsolicited, unsolicited inquiries, and perhaps from retirees. So new workforce entrants come from school, vocational school, post-secondary school, our high school, and they're going to look around, they're going to find out what jobs are open, and they're going to make some overtures to the company by sending a resume or an application or both, or coming in because the jobs have been posted on monster.com or jobs.com and come in and fill out an application. We'll also find new entrants to our workforce from people who are unemployed. And these are people who have worked in the past but are not currently working. Sometimes organizations like to go to the unemployed ranks because they'll find people are be able to encourage them, and people who've been laid off from jobs want to work, and so they are usually a pretty eager pool to try to recruit from. And normally speaking, when a company goes to do that type of recruiting, they're going to find a skilled labor force. A lot of times this is done through state organizations, and if the company does that, there's usually is no charge that there would be through a private employment agency, although those folks usually refer people for white-collar job sales, publicity, and other types. And then you can also possibly get them, as we mentioned here, from competitors or other businesses in the area. These are folks who are, as the slide points out, currently working, but in some fashion actively seeking other employment. Now, in some cases, they're not, as the next bullet points out, that they really aren't seeking employment, but they're the kind that I like to refer to as open to an offer. So they're relatively secure where they are. They like where they are. But if somebody made them an offer, as in a movie said, an offer couldn't be refused, pardon me, they're going to take it. So it's not, don't look at this person as a disloyal employee. He or she is not. They're looking for an opportunity. And they may be looking for an opportunity because there isn't an opportunity where they are. They're stymied at their particular position. There's somebody above them who's going to be around as long as they are. Or because of their expertise, they're limited to where they can go in the company. Same way with education. So this is not a disloyal employee, but it's an employee who is looking for an opportunity and doesn't believe that opportunity exists in his current or her current employment. And then the last bullet talks about people who are employed but are actively seeking employment at another company are not stumblebones. They are out. Let's not talk about them being on the cutting edge, but let's talk about them being a cut above. They're looking for a challenge. They're looking for a new opportunity. And so we should think of those people as, this is somebody I'm looking for. Now, there's a downside to that, and you ought to have figured that out already, and you probably have. If that person is looking for a job today, am I going to be able to have enough work for that person to do, challenging work for that person to do, and offer that person a set of benefits that is going to keep him or her happy for a long period of time? Pardon me. And we know that people today, younger people today entering the job market, don't think they're going to be with the same company until they get to age 65 and have a retirement lunch and get uh, a gold watch and a pat on the back and say, come back and see us sometime. They're going to move around. So slide says these people are open to opportunities. They don't worry a whole lot. I think there's a lot of pluses here. This is me talking, not the text or some other text. I think there's a lot of pluses here. I see some downsides. And a company has to be prepared to offer this person who's looking the right kind of incentives to stay long term. I don't know how you want to define long term, and I'm not going to put a number on that. But if you're going to hire this person, you don't want this person walking out the door in a year or so. You want this person to be around longer. We talked last week about cost and recruiting, both direct cost and indirect cost. And so you don't want to get involved in this into having some type of revolving door. Doesn't look good for you as a company to have hired somebody and he or she's gone in a relatively short period of time, because that may mean you don't offer the requisite benefits. You may not have a challenging job, or the person may not have been in a challenging job. And so all those can be looked at as downsides for the next person coming in looking for a job. He or she's going to say, well, wait a minute, how come Joe or Sally left after a short period of time? And they don't consider that this person has the wanderlust. He or she is looking for a new opportunity, a new challenge, looking for something different, that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, which we know it's not, but old term, old saw. So I see this as a real potential downside. There's a lot of potential upside to it too, but I think companies have to go into these situations with their eyes open, understanding that this person who is currently employed and who is looking for a new opportunity, a new challenge, is going to have to be challenged continually, or we're going to experience the same thing that company X experienced, this person coming to us because he or she is looking for a new opportunity. So I don't use any of these to be downers. I use these to be, let's pay attention. Let's think about what we're seeing here, and making sure that we're doing due diligence when we hire somebody. And there's the last one here. These are the organizational attractiveness. This is what gets people to come in the door. And I would like to say that the one to me that sticks out, and I want to change this a little bit, more than the other three, is organizational values. Is this the company I want to work for? Is this company a leader in its field? And does it project itself well? And does it care about its employees? Does it care about its customers? Does it put out quality product? All those things I think have to be thought of. And that's why people come to want to work. I want to be associated with such and such. And many people will do this and say, I want to be here. And I realize I'm a small cog in a big wheel, but I would rather be that than be a bigger cog on a smaller wheel. So I'm probably spending a little bit more time on this than what I need to, but I see this as a double-edged sword. I see that companies should welcome those looking for challenge and opportunity. But I think that they need to also think that we need to make sure that this person who is looking for challenge and opportunity will be given opportunity and will be continually challenged to do bigger and better things. Now, there are many sources to use in reaching a target pool of applicants in recruiting process. Well, we know about advertising, usually accomplished through the newspapers and the internet, probably more the internet today than the newspaper. Although, of course, if we take away from, entry-level jobs, and you're looking for targeted jobs, targeted recruiting in trade magazines or something, you might find some larger newspapers that you'd want to advertise in, like and national newspapers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. A couple of them would be the Washington Post, possibly Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times. I'm just naming some large ones that I know right off the bat. USA Today might be another one. So you would maybe look in those, but otherwise you're probably going to go to monster.com or jobs.com. Trade publications, as I mentioned before, if you're going to use trade publications, then you're doing targeted recruiting. You're not trying to cast a wide net. Now you're trying to get people that are specific. So this is the targeted scope that you're after. Other sources we talked about before: employment agencies, both private and public, and then obviously using company recruiters. Now, normally speaking, when you have a company recruiter or recruiters, they tend to go to college campuses, perhaps differently depending upon the type of job you're looking for. They might go to vocational schools, they might go to community colleges, they might even go to high schools. A lot of high schools have job fairs, and company recruiters which of course colleges do as well. And then they might go to trade shows and things of that nature, or maybe some other special events. You can also do things like as internships, executive search firms, professional associations could be mined for potential hires. So there are a lot of ways to do that. Internal recruiting environment comes from referrals, as we mentioned, internal candidates, and rehires, to mention a few. Yes, rehires. We don't always think about that. That people could have left for whatever reason and then come back. Said, I'd like to have my job back. And as long as the person had good work skills and left on good terms, there's probably no reason not to hire them back. If they want to come back, they're probably saying, I realized that I had it pretty good here. And that may be with people who have retired from someplace else and now they want to come back. Maybe don't want to work full time, they work part time, or work some other way, or maybe work as a consultant. So those things will all need to be looked at. So I'd like to have a couple other slides here just to look at and to go over for a few minutes on some recruiting and maybe some selection. And this is what we're going to go into with the selection process to some extent. So we have recruited, for the sake of our argument here, debate, course time, lecture time, whatever you want to say here, we've recruited a sufficient pool of qualified, I stress the word qualified, applicants. And now we are going to begin the selection process. And I want to make it very clear, because you're going to have a paper due, an assignment due later on about doing the steps in the recruiting process, and you're going to have a paper due, an assignment due, in the selecting process or selection process. There is a little bit of overlap here, but they are distinct. So recruiting is finding the people, getting them to apply for vacancies, either having them complete an application or complete a resume, or both, and then determining from all that number a sufficient pool of qualified candidates. Once that has been completed, that process has been completed, we have finished the recruiting part. We're not doing anything more. Anything of looking at applications for additional screening is now in the selection process. So in the recruiting process, we found the number of qualified applicants. Remember, we found qualified applicants. And anybody who is not qualified is not an applicant. So we're going to stop the recruiting process when we have found a sufficient number of qualified applicants. That stops the recruiting process. Anything beyond this now is going in until we make a hire, is in that part of the selection, is the selection process. So I want to make this very clear. We have a pool of qualified applicants. Now we're going to selection. Now you can get that pool if you're a large enough company and you have software set up. Somebody sends in an application or a resume or both, and they go through some kind of a system that weeds people out. They look for words, or they look for phrases, or it looks for education, or it looks for experience, or it looks for skills. And if they're not met, then that person is not a qualified applicant. So then we get to the selecting process. And so HR personnel, along with the first line supervisor or hiring manager, choose from the applicant pool what they believe to be the best of the best. Now, in many cases, before the hiring manager is engaged in this process, the HR folks will go through some sort of a screening process, and we're going to talk more about that and in greater depth when we get there. So the initial screening term I like to call it, and your book uses that term as well, initial screening, is most often performed by the HR folks. They may do some initial interviewing, they may conduct some testing, whatever that happens to be, but this is the initial process. And we have to remember, and we'll expound on it to a larger extent, this is a difficult process. This is not easy. Nobody here snaps their fingers and makes a decision. Because unless there is a specific test used, to determine somebody's skill, the selection process is often subjective. Now, there are tools that we use to make the process as objective as possible. And we'll talk about that when we get to selection. We'll talk about that when we get to the interviewing part, and talk about what you can use and how you can use that, and how you can be as objective as possible. But the selection process, I want to tell you, I want to put this up to you and put this in your mind now, and we'll talk about it a lot more later. There's a lot of bias in this, and you have to do whatever it is that's necessary to remove that bias, or at least to damp the bias down. So where it's almost completely moved out. Folks at this stage need to be right, because the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization is at risk if the wrong person is hired. 3 questions asked about a potential job candidate are, and the text points these out, and I have not changed the wording here very much. What can the applicant do? What will he or she do? Now, what can he do? What will he or she do? And does this applicant fit the organization's mission, goals, objectives, and values? Not selecting the right candidate increases job turnover. So we need to look at some things here. How do we get there? We get basic biographical data. We do some reference checking. We do defamation of character checking. We have to be careful about negligent hiring. Again, all things we're going to talk about to some extent a little bit later on. Now, I'm not going to get into methods and questions to ask because that's something that we want to talk about in interviewing it and pay a lot more attention to than we're going to pay attention tonight. We're doing an overview. But there are two things here that I want to talk about just for a second, and then we'll again dwell on this a little bit more. Organization looks for one of two types of people. They look for a person who fits the job. In other words, that person has the qualifications, experience, education, skills, etc. needed to fill that job. Or the organization looks for someone who fits the organization. And that's what I talk about. Fits the organization's mission, goals, objectives, and values. The Toyota Corporation of America, I think that's the right name for it, does this on a regular basis. They look for people who fit the Toyota values. And they will spend some time with an individual, several days, talking about whether or not, or just not so much talking about whether, but determining whether or not this person fits within the Toyota scheme of things. Now, Toyota may not do this for every job, but they certainly do it for a lot of jobs, and it's very necessary for them because that's what they believe in. And Toyota, as we know, is a very successful company, both in Japan and here in the United States. So it's something really that they look for. There is another thing to think about here too, and that is when you're selecting a person, if that person does not have the skills that you're looking for a particular job, but does match the organization's or seems to be a fit with the organization's mission, goals, objectives, and values, you may want to say, well, look, we don't think you're qualified for this job, but you are qualified for another job we have. Or we want to keep we don't have a job open for you right now. We want to keep your resume on file. And this is not just a statement we're telling you. We do intend to contact you when we have a position open in a few months, and we expect to have one open in a few months. So it's something that really is important. And I'm just going to put this slide up here for you to look at just for a second. And it does perhaps a little bit better job, or reinforces what I was talking about, the difference between job-based fit and organization-based fit. Organizations have to determine what they're looking for. And as I mentioned before a couple of different times, it bears repeating. You can't increase turnover. Organizations need to keep their turnover as low as possible. This is not only is it a money issue, it's a morale issue. If people leave, there's something wrong, and the company may not be able to put their hands on it right away, but the quicker they do, the better. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in some cases, about hiring the wrong person, or getting a person with too many skills, too much education. That people just don't want to do that. At the most basic level, then, the selection process attempts to identify the person or persons, assuming you have more than one vacancy, that have the greatest chance of meeting or exceeding organization performance standards. Another reason you have a job analysis, because that's what a job analysis does. It spells out what the employee is supposed to be doing, what the job requires. So that's what the job requires, and that's what the employee has to do. Simple as that. Remember, that doesn't mean quantity. It may refer to other criteria, such as quality of output, reduced absenteeism, on-the-job satisfaction, and career potential. All of those things are important. But we need to think about those things in the selection process, because they're very important to us. we bringing people into an entry-level job. We've kind of stressed that right along here in this over an hour and a half that we've been talking, or I guess perhaps a better way to say it, I've been talking, you've been listening. We're bringing these people in an entry-level job, and we want to see, all things being equal, that they have potential for bigger and better things. And if they don't, then we have to stop and think about what we're trying to get out of our hiring process. Now, if we're casting a wide net, and we're hiring people we don't expect to stay around for a long time, that's different. But by and large, if we're expecting people to stick around, then we are looking for them to have some kind of potential to move up on the promotion ladder. If we don't look for that in the selection process, then we're making a mistake. And we have to ask ourselves, if we haven't done that, are we then in some fashion not meeting the potential employees' expectations? I'll leave that to you to determine, but it's something we really need to consider. Therefore, according to my notes, it's important that the organization have what it considers as the optimum match between the open vacancy and the particular characteristic or characteristics the potential candidate possesses. So it ought to be like this. It ought to be I said match. It ought to be a fit. Match, fit, okay, whatever word you want to use, but it should be. If it's not, then we have to stop and think about things. I'll use myself as an example. Again, many years ago, I went to work for a company, probably more because I needed a job than I wanted the job that they were offering. And while I liked the people that I worked with for the most part, I didn't particularly care for the job. I didn't care for the company. Now, I didn't dislike the company, but it wasn't something that fit me, and I probably didn't fit them. And I probably was not an ideal candidate. I didn't take a lot of time off or anything like that. I didn't come in late. That's not my nature. And I did the work that I was supposed to do, but it wasn't interesting work to me. I did get some assignments there where I had to do some research and things of that nature, and that was fairly interesting. But for the most part, I didn't, and I was kind of like a fish out of water. And some of the people that I worked for kind of realized that. And so when I left 13, 14 months later, it was good for me, and it was probably good for them. I don't think I was a bad employee, but I don't think I was as good of an employee as I could have been had I been more interested in what this company did with its products, and I was more attuned to that than what I was. So that's why I'm saying it's very critical that companies do those things. I probably presented myself. I think I presented myself well. I don't think I oversold myself when I went to work for them. But again, I think it was a question that I was in the position I was looking for a job and needed a job, and I probably wasn't as discriminatory in what I was looking for as I should have been. And that happens. And we who are in the selection process have to do whatever it is that's necessary to make sure we don't make mistakes, and or if we've made them, that we continue to repeat them. Not fair to the employee, it's not fair to the company, it's not fair to the fellow employees. So it's something that really needs to be considered. Now, as we're winding down here, figure 8.1 in your text presents what the author state as a model of the selecting process, always accompanied via an interview. Seldom is someone hired without some kind of an interview. So it's something that we need to really consider when we're selecting people, to make sure that the interview process is what it ought to be. Many different types of interviews. Organizations must determine which type to use based on the open position, and we'll discuss this more fully in week 5. And by the way, I have been saving some information I've gotten that I gather from the Sunday business section in the New York Times, various people who are CEOs for the most part of companies. And one of the questions that's asked to each of these people is, what do you look for when hiring? And I'm going to compile some of those. So I've kept them over the last 6 or 7 weeks and just bring them to you as what practitioners do. What do they look for when they're hiring somebody? What questions do they ask? What answers are they looking for? And I think that will be valuable for you because it puts a face on something. I'll tell you who the person is, what company they run, etc. And you can do whatever you want to with it. But I think it puts a personal viewpoint on what people are looking for in the selecting process. Now, we're going to cover staffing a little bit in the next few minutes. It's ensuring the organization has the right people in the right place and in the right numbers. Pardon me. To assure that the organization is able to carry out its mission. And of course, then the objectives which support the mission. One of the things I want to mention to you here is, and not necessarily, and it is mentioned in the text a couple of places, but I don't really have it in my notes for right now, and that is, it's important to make sure that the critical positions in the organization have the right staffing. And so that's what human resource planning would also tell you, pardon me, combination with the job analysis would tell you what positions are critical and what positions you could probably do without filling for a period of time. Obviously, you don't want to go without a position for forever. That's not going to work. But knowing which positions are critical to the company's continued successful operation or operations is going to help you. This is the objective of the staffing addresses. That's why we staff, because we have to make sure we can support the mission, goals, and objectives of the organization. In the last paragraph on page 1, the staffing object is continual. We talked about that before. This is critical for an organization's continuity. And I guess it would be if I'm going to use continual one place and continuity the next, the kind of similar type words. Staffing gaps may be acceptable in the short run, but never in the long run, as short staffing will eventually lead to a decline in employee morale. This goes back to we're going to have people work overtime, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we don't really discuss this a lot in this course, but there are 2 classes of employees. There are exempt employees and non-exempt. An exempt employee is paid a salary regardless of the number of hours he or she works. Now, that's a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, if they're expected to work 40 hours a week and continually work 30 hours a week, somebody's going to say something about that. A non-exempt employee is a person who is an hourly employee. He or she is paid by the hour, and in some cases they have to either sign in and out on a daily basis, or they have to use a time clock. So we know that if we have hourly workers, the non-exempt, that they are going to be paid overtime, and that would be time and a half for any hours worked over 40 hours a week. I'd like to just step back here and remind you that 40 hours a week is not calculated necessarily on a calendar week. It's calculated on whatever the organization's work week is. So if the organization's work week is Monday through Friday, that's fine. We know that. If it's Tuesday through Saturday, pardon me, or Wednesday through Sunday, that's their work week. And if more than 40 hours are worked within that work week, the company's normal work week, the wage earner will be paid time and a half for any hours over 40. The non-exempt employee is not going to be paid for any hours he or she works over 40. But after a period of time, they're not going to want to be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. That's not to say that some of them don't. Even now, that when there's no requirement for overtime for the wage earners. But after a while, that becomes counterproductive and non-productive, as we talked about before. Sometimes this action is coupled with the recruiting and selection process. That's the staffing. At other times, it is placing current employees in positions best suited to their abilities and capabilities, education, skills, and experience. Regardless of how this human resource management task is performed, it is always preceded by working from or with a job analysis. As with the two previous tasks, getting this right saves the organization time and money. And of course, before all that becomes human resource planning. Figure 1.2 on page 9 depicts the staffing system or notional staffing system. It lists the tasks and activities performed by those charged with implementing and managing an organization's staffing system and processes. The ultimate goal, as you can see if you're looking at that figure, is to secure, motivate, and retain, very operative word there, the right employees in the quantity and quality needed to perform the work of the organization and to help it achieve its stated mission, goals, and objectives. Well, we have spent the last 51 minutes talking about the concluding part of the overview of recruitment, selection, staffing, and job analysis. I'd like to thank you for your attention. I know that none of you had tuned in, and of course that's okay. I understand that. I will have the lecture uploaded tomorrow morning, probably about 9:30. I will also send you the appropriate YouTube link so you can watch it that way. As always, if you have any questions about what I've presented tonight, what you've read in the text, what I have posted for assignments or for forum discussions, please contact me at your convenience. You can always post a question in the forum section, and I'll be happy to answer it. Please remember, in the forum discussions, I want you to and encourage you to interact with each other, to trade ideas, exchange ideas, to pick up on what other people have to say, to enlarge upon that. I only ask you to be courteous in your responses and respectful to your fellow students. I will answer each of you, and even those of you who answer other students. I feel that's important, and I will try to answer you in a way to make what I have to say a teaching point or a teaching tool, usually to hopefully to broaden your horizons and have you look at issues from a different standpoint. So I do thank you for your attention. And again, I'll have this uploaded at about 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you and good evening.